But let me tell you about the invitation that started this whole mess. Or rather, the invitation that never came. 3 weeks ago, I was in my temporary quarters at Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan, reviewing intelligence reports in the pre-dawn darkness, when my secure satellite phone rang. It was Bella, calling from what sounded like a restaurant in Aspen, her voice bright with excitement and champagne. "Sarah, oh my God, I have the most amazing news!" She'd gushed, the connection crackling with the 8.5-hour time difference between us. "Preston proposed. Can you believe it? We're engaged!" I'd forced enthusiasm into my voice despite the exhaustion of running operations for 72 straight hours. "That's wonderful, Bella. Congratulations. Tell me everything." And she had. For 23 minutes, while I sat in a fortified bunker surrounded by classified materials that could reshape Middle Eastern geopolitics. My half-sister described every detail of Preston Whitmore III's proposal. The private helicopter ride to their family's mountain estate. The string quartet hidden in the woods. The 5-carat Tiffany ring that cost more than most people's houses. The champagne that was older than I was. "And we're having the engagement party in 3 weeks," she'd continued, her voice somehow managing to get even more excited. "Mom is planning everything. It's going to be at the Broadmoor, in the Grand Ballroom. Everyone who matters in Colorado will be there. All of Dad's Senate colleagues, the governor, every major donor from the Republican Party. It's going to be incredible." I'd waited for the invitation, for the details about date and time, for the assumption that, of course, I'd be there for my sister's engagement party. Instead, there was silence. "Bella?" I'd prompted. "When exactly is the party?" "Oh, her voice had suddenly become careful, calculated. "It's Saturday the 15th, at 7 p.m. But Sarah, you know how these things are. It's really more of a political event than a family gathering. Very formal, very strategic. Dad's using it to launch his re-election campaign, and Mom has been planning the guest list for months." The guest list. Not "I hope you can make it." Not "I'll send you the details." The guest list, as if I were a logistical consideration rather than her sister. "Are you saying I'm not invited?" I'd asked directly, because 3 years of military training had taught me to cut through euphemisms and get to the operational reality. "It's not that you're not invited," she'd said quickly. "It's just, you know how Dad feels about mixing military stuff with his political events. He thinks it sends the wrong message to donors. And you're so busy with your work over there. We didn't want to put pressure on you to travel all that way for something that's really more business than family." The hurt had been immediate and sharp, but I'd kept my voice professional. "I see. Plus," she'd continued, apparently not picking up on my tone, "you know how you get at these fancy events. You're not really comfortable with the social aspects, and it would be awful if you felt out of place on such an important night." How I get at fancy events. As if my discomfort with their artificial political theater was a character flaw, rather than a normal human response to watching people treat waitstaff like furniture and discuss military casualties like stock prices. "I understand," I'd said, though I understood far more than she realized. I understood that my family had made a deliberate choice to exclude me from a major life event. I understood that they'd rationalized that choice by deciding I wouldn't enjoy it anyway. I understood that they'd convinced themselves they were doing me a favor by not inviting me to watch my sister celebrate the most important moment of her life so far. "You're not mad, are you?" she'd asked, and for a moment she'd sounded like the little girl I remembered teaching to braid friendship bracelets. "No, Bella, I'm not mad." And I wasn't mad, I was heartbroken. There's a difference between anger, which burns hot and fast, and heartbreak, which settles into your chest like shrapnel and stays there for months. I'd hung up the phone and sat in the darkness for a long time, listening to the distant sound of helicopters and wondering when exactly I'd become someone my own family felt they needed to protect their guest from. The real invitation, if you could call it that, came 2 weeks later, forwarded through 3 different military mail systems until it finally reached my temporary duty station. A thick cream envelope with the Blackwood family crest embossed in gold, my name written in my stepmother's perfect calligraphy, Colonel Sarah E. Martinez. At least they'd gotten my rank right, that was something. Inside was an engraved invitation that managed to be both lavish and impersonal. Senator and Mrs. Richard Blackwood request the honor of your presence at the engagement celebration of their daughter Isabella Rose Blackwood and Mr. Preston Whitmore III. Saturday, the 15th of October, 7 o'clock in the evening, the Broadmoor Resort, Colorado Springs, Colorado. Black tie required. No personal note. No. We hope you can make it. No acknowledgement that this was my sister's engagement party, and that maybe, just maybe, I might want to be there to celebrate with her. Just the same formal language they'd use for any political acquaintance whose presence was required for social reasons, but not particularly desired. But here's what made it worse. The envelope was postmarked 4 days after my conversation with Bella, which meant they'd had the invitations printed and ready to mail for weeks before she called me, which meant the decision to include me was made after the fact, probably after someone, my stepmother, maybe, or a family friend with better manners, pointed out that excluding me entirely would be a political liability. What about Richard's stepdaughter, the one in the military? Oh God, you're right, we can't not invite her, people will ask questions. So they'd grudgingly added my name to the list, probably with the hope that I'd be too busy or too far away to actually attend. After all, I was deployed to Afghanistan. Even if I wanted to come, which they'd convinced themselves I wouldn't, how could I possibly make it back in time? What they didn't know was that I'd been scheduled for rotation back to the States anyway. What they didn't know was that my deployment was ending exactly 3 days before the party. What they didn't know was that I'd already put in for leave specifically so I could attend Bella's engagement celebration, back when I still believed I'd be welcomed there. What they really didn't know was that my early return from Afghanistan wasn't routine rotation. It was because the intelligence work I'd been doing, work that involved tracking terrorist financing networks through 7 countries and required language skills in Arabic, Farsi, and Pashto, had been so successful that I was being recalled for a special assignment. The kind of special assignment that involves briefings in the Pentagon and ceremonies in the White House. But they'd never asked about my work. They'd never shown interest in my achievements. To them, my military service was an inconvenience that occasionally interfered with their social calendar, not a career that was earning recognition at the highest levels of government. I'd called my commanding officer that night to confirm I could make the party. Colonel Rebecca Morrison, no relation to Preston's family, thankfully, had not only approved my leave, but had insisted I travel in dress blues. You're representing the Air Force at a high-profile political event, she'd explained. Senator Blackwood may not understand your value, but we do. Wear your uniform with pride, Martinez. Show them what an Air Force officer looks like. I'd thought it was about representing the service. I'd thought Colonel Morrison wanted me to be a visible reminder that military families exist in political circles, that we're not abstract concepts to be debated in committee rooms, but real people with real achievements. I hadn't realized that Colonel Morrison knew about the classified orders I'd be receiving. I hadn't realized that she knew my trip to Denver was about more than just a family obligation. I hadn't realized that she was setting up a situation where my family would have to confront exactly who they'd been dismissing all these years. The orders came through yesterday morning, delivered by hand to my temporary quarters by a captain I didn't recognize. Priority transport. Washington, D.C. report to Joint Base Andrews, no later than 1,900 hours, October 16th. Purpose: classified briefing and ceremony. Contact: Office of the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary of Defense. Not some mid-level Pentagon official or even a general. The Secretary of Defense wanted to see me personally. I'd read the orders 3 times before the implications hit me. This wasn't routine. This wasn't a standard debriefing or even a normal commendation ceremony. When the Secretary of Defense requests your personal presence, it means you've done something extraordinary. It means you've contributed to national security in ways that most people will never know about and can never be publicly acknowledged. It also meant that my family's engagement party, which had been the most important event on their social calendar, was now just a minor stop on my way to something infinitely more significant. The irony was delicious. They'd reluctantly invited me, assuming I'd decline due to distance and military obligations. Instead, I'd be attending on my way to receive recognition from the highest levels of the American government. They tried to minimize my importance in their lives. not realizing that their entire social and political world was built on foundations I helped protect. Senator Richard Blackwood spent his days writing legislation about military spending and foreign policy. Tomorrow, he'd discover that his stepdaughter, the one he considered an embarrassment, had been personally implementing the kind of operations he could only theorize about in committee hearings. I'd landed at Denver International this morning, 3 hours before the engagement party, with just enough time to check into a hotel and change into my dress blues. I'd chosen the Grand Hyatt, partly because it was convenient to the airport, and partly because I knew Richard would approve of the choice if he knew about it. The irony of seeking his approval even while preparing to shatter his assumptions about me wasn't lost on me. In my hotel room, I'd laid out my dress blues with the same precision I used for mission planning. Every ribbon in perfect alignment, every button polished to mirror brightness, every crease sharp enough to cut glass. Looking at my reflection, I'd seen an Air Force officer who'd earned her rank through years of sacrifice and achievement. But I'd also seen Richard's stepdaughter, still hoping that maybe this time they'd see me clearly. I'd practiced what I'd say to Bella, how I'd congratulate her and Preston, how I'd navigate the inevitable questions about my military hobby from their political friends, how I'd deflect attention from myself and keep the focus on the happy couple, the way a good sister should. I'd never imagined I'd be practicing those conversations while packing for a trip to the Pentagon. The drive to the Broadmoor had taken 45 minutes through Colorado Springs traffic, giving me plenty of time to rehearse my approach. I'd decided to arrive early, find Richard and my stepmother Nancy, and get the awkward family dynamics out of the way before the party officially started. I'd congratulate Bella privately, meet Preston's parents, and try to blend into the background for the rest of the evening. I'd wanted this to be about her, not about me. I'd wanted to be the sister who showed up, smiled for photos, and gave a gracious toast about love and happiness and bright futures. Instead, I'd walked into a war zone. Richard had been standing near the entrance to the grand ballroom, greeting early arrivals with his politician's smile and firm handshake, when he'd spotted me crossing the lobby. His expression had shifted from welcoming to horrified in the space of a heartbeat. "Sarah." His voice had been tight, controlled, designed not to carry to the small crowd of donors and political allies milling around the reception area. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here for Bella's engagement party," I'd replied, confused by his obvious distress. "You invited me." "Not in uniform," he'd hissed, grabbing my elbow and pulling me aside, away from the curious glances of his political colleagues. "What were you thinking? This is a formal political event, not a military ceremony. People are going to think I'm using my daughter's engagement to make some kind of statement about defense spending." I had looked down at my dress blues, at the ribbons that represented years of service and achievement, at the uniform that I wore with pride and honor. "I'm sorry if my appearance is inconvenient, but I'm flying to Washington immediately after the party. I didn't have time to pack civilian clothes." "Then you should have chosen Washington over the party," he'd snapped. "You should have prioritized family over your career for once in your life." That's when I'd realized the fundamental disconnect between us. Richard saw my military service as a career choice, like choosing law over medicine or banking over journalism. He couldn't comprehend that it was a calling, a commitment that transcended personal convenience. He couldn't understand that when the military says you're needed in Washington, you go to Washington, regardless of what else is happening in your life. "Richard," I'd said, trying to keep my voice level, "I can't just skip military orders because they're inconvenient for your social calendar. That's not how service works." "Service?" he'd repeated, making the words sound like a profanity. "You keep talking about service like you're saving the world, Sarah. You're a desk officer who speaks a few foreign languages. Let's not pretend you're some kind of war hero." A desk officer who speaks a few foreign languages. If he only knew. If he knew that his desk officer's stepdaughter had spent the last 8 months infiltrating terrorist financing networks that spanned 3 continents. If he knew that the intelligence I'd gathered had prevented attacks that would have killed hundreds of American civilians. If he knew that the few foreign languages I spoke had allowed me to pose as everything from a Pakistani businesswoman, to an Iranian graduate student, to a Saudi diplomat's wife, depending on what the mission required. If he knew that I'd spent 3 weeks in a Taliban-controlled village, pretending to be an international aid worker, while actually mapping the locations of weapons caches that would later be destroyed in precisely targeted airstrikes. If he knew that I'd walked through Kabul markets with improvised explosive devices hidden in vendor stalls, memorizing the faces of bomb makers who thought they were invisible. If he knew that the reason I'd been recalled early from Afghanistan wasn't because my deployment was over, but because I'd uncovered a plot to assassinate 3 American ambassadors, and the intelligence I'd provided had saved their lives and prevented an international crisis that could have destabilized the entire Middle East. But he couldn't know any of that, because my work was classified at levels that required security clearances he'd never achieve even as a senator, because the operations I'd participated in were so sensitive that their very existence was compartmentalized beyond his legislative purview. So I'd stood there in my dress blues letting him call me a desk officer, while the ribbons on my chest represented achievements that dwarfed anything he'd accomplished in 20 years of political maneuvering. "I understand you're disappointed," I'd said finally, "but I'm here to celebrate Bella's engagement. Can we please just focus on that?" Disappointed? He'd laughed, a bitter sound that made several nearby guests turn their heads. "Sarah, I'm not disappointed. I'm humiliated. Do you have any idea what this looks like? My stepdaughter showing up to a formal political event, dressed like she's about to invade something?" That's when Nancy had appeared, resplendent in designer silk and diplomatic panic. Nancy Blackwood, former Miss Colorado, current society hostess, and the woman who'd spent 5 years trying to transform me into an acceptable political daughter. "Sarah, darling," she'd said with the kind of smile that could freeze champagne, "how wonderful that you could make it. Though I have to say that uniform is quite prominent. Are you sure you wouldn't be more comfortable in something less? Marshall?" Marshall, as if my uniform was a weapon instead of a symbol of honor. "I'm fine, Nancy, thank you. It's just that some of our guests might not understand the context. They might think we're making some kind of political statement about military intervention or defense spending. And tonight is really about celebrating young love, not about work." Work. She'd reduced 8 years of military service, 3 combat deployments, and achievements that would make headlines if they weren't classified to work. That's when I'd seen Bella approaching, radiant in a gown that probably cost more than my annual salary, her face lighting up when she spotted me. For a moment, I'd thought everything would be okay. Bella had always been different from her parents. She'd always seemed to understand that my military service was important, even if she didn't understand exactly what it involved. "Sarah," she'd exclaimed, moving toward me with arms outstretched. "You made it! I can't believe you're actually here." But then she'd stopped, her expression shifting as she took in my uniform, her parents' obvious distress, and the curious stares from nearby guests. "Oh," she'd said quietly, you're in uniform." "I'm flying to Washington after the party," I'd explained again. "I didn't have time to change." "Washington?" She'd looked confused. "For what?" "Military business. A briefing." "On a Sunday?" Richard had interjected. "What kind of briefing happens on a Sunday that's so important you can't postpone it for your sister's engagement party?" I'd looked at their faces, Richard's political panic, Nancy's social horror, and Bella's dawning realization that my presence was becoming a problem. 3 people who claimed to love me, all united in their wish that I was someone else. "The kind of briefing that doesn't get postponed," I'd said finally. "The kind that involves national security and people's lives." "National security," Richard had repeated mockingly. "Sarah, you analyze foreign radio transmissions. Let's not pretend the fate of the Republic hangs on your PowerPoint presentations." Foreign radio transmissions. PowerPoint presentations. If he only knew that the intelligence I'd gathered in Afghanistan had been briefed to the president herself. If he only knew that the radio transmissions I analyzed had revealed a coordinated attack plan targeting American military bases across the Middle East. If he only knew that my work had saved more American lives than his entire legislative career. But I'd looked at Bella's face, at the tears starting to form in her eyes as she realized her engagement party was turning into a family confrontation, and I'd made a choice. "You're right," I'd said quietly. "This is Bella's night. I shouldn't have come." "Sarah, no," Bella had started to protest, but Richard had cut her off. "Actually, that might be best," he'd said. "Maybe we can all get together next week, when things are less complicated." Next week. When the inconvenient military daughter would be safely back in uniform somewhere far away, where she couldn't embarrass the family in front of important donors. I understand, I'd said, looking directly at Bella. Congratulations on your engagement. I hope you and Preston are very happy together. I'd started to leave then, but Nancy had stopped me with a hand on my arm. Sarah, you know we love you, she'd said, her voice taking on that tone adults use with difficult children. But sometimes love means understanding when your presence might not be helpful. Tonight is about celebrating Bella and Preston's future. It's about bringing families together, about showing unity and tradition. Your uniform sends a different message. A different message. As if my service to my country was somehow incompatible with family unity and tradition. What message does it send, Nancy? I'd asked quietly. She'd glanced around nervously, making sure no guests were within earshot. It sends the message that this family prioritizes military intervention over diplomatic solutions. It makes Richard look like a warmonger. It suggests that we're using a social event to promote a political agenda. What political agenda? The agenda of supporting American service members? The agenda of using your sister's engagement party to remind everyone that Richard sits on the Armed Services Committee, she'd hissed. People will think he's showing off his military connections instead of celebrating his daughter. Military connections. As if I was some kind of political prop instead of a human being who'd chosen to serve her country. That's when I'd realized the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. To my family, I wasn't Sarah Martinez, Air Force officer and devoted sister. I was Sarah Martinez, political liability and source of social embarrassment. My achievements didn't matter because they didn't advance Richard's career. My sacrifices didn't count because they didn't enhance the family's social standing. My service didn't have value because it couldn't be monetized or leveraged for political gain. So I'd left. I'd walked out of the Broadmoor Resort, past the valet parking and the designer-dressed guests, carrying my overnight bag and my wounded pride. I'd driven back to the hotel, changed out of my dress blues, and sat on the bed for an hour, trying to process what had just happened. My family had chosen their political image over their relationship with me. They'd decided that my uniform, the symbol of everything I'd worked for, everything I believed in, everything I'd sacrificed for, was more embarrassing than inspiring. They'd made it clear that there was no version of me they could accept. Not the ambitious teenager who'd chosen the Air Force Academy over Harvard. Not the dedicated officer who'd spent years in dangerous assignments. Not the decorated veteran who'd earned recognition from the highest levels of government. Not even the loving sister who'd flown halfway around the world to celebrate Bella's engagement. There was no version of Sarah Martinez that fit their vision of the perfect political family. So I'd made a decision. I'd called the Air Force Transportation Office and arranged for early departure to Andrews Air Force Base. I'd packed my things, checked out of the hotel, and driven to Denver International Airport, where a military transport was waiting to take me to Washington for the most important briefing of my career. The family that didn't want me would have to learn to live without me. And tomorrow, when the news broke about the ceremony at the Pentagon, they'd discover exactly what they'd thrown away. But first, they'd hear my name announced over the PA system in this airport, calling me to board a flight that would take me to receive recognition they could never imagine. The irony was perfect. The family that had just expelled me for wearing my uniform was about to learn that the uniform they found so embarrassing represented achievements that surpassed anything they'd ever accomplished. In 90 seconds, everyone in this airport would know that Colonel Sarah Elena Martinez was traveling on official military business of the highest importance, including the family who just decided they were ashamed to be associated with her. In exactly 4 minutes, the gate agent is going to announce my name over the PA system, calling me to board the military charter flight as the youngest colonel in Air Force history. The same family that just threw me out of their house for embarrassing them in uniform is about to hear that announcement echo through every speaker in this airport. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My duffel bag sits at my feet, hastily packed with the few belongings I could grab before my stepfather literally pushed me out the front door of their sprawling Aspen mansion. "Get out," he'd screamed, his face red with rage, spittle flying from his lips as his perfectly manicured political composure finally cracked. "We're done pretending you're part of this family. Done with your military obsession ruining our reputation. Done with you embarrassing us every time you show up in that costume." That was exactly 14 minutes ago. Now I'm surrounded by the controlled chaos of Gate C-23 at Denver International Airport, where a small crowd of high-ranking military officials wait quietly near the priority boarding area. They keep glancing at their watches, then at me, with the kind of reverence and respect that would make my family's heads spin if they could see it. Major General Patricia Kane stands near the window, her silver hair catching the afternoon light, occasionally checking her secure phone. Beside her, Brigadier General Marcus Torres reviews classified documents while stealing glances at me with something approaching awe. These aren't just any military officials. These are the people who run wars, who advise presidents, who make decisions that reshape the global balance of power. And they're all here for me. The irony is so perfect it feels scripted by some cosmic screenwriter with a dark sense of humor. My stepfather, Senator Richard Blackwood, chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, the man who literally writes military policy, just kicked me out of his house for wearing my uniform to my half-sister's engagement party. He called it inappropriate attention-seeking behavior and, quote, disrespectful to the solemnity of the occasion. What he doesn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend in his carefully constructed world of political theater and social climbing, is that I'm wearing these dress blues because I'm about to board a classified military transport to Washington, D.C., where tomorrow morning I'll be receiving the Air Force Cross in a private ceremony with the Secretary of Defense. Not just any ceremony, the kind of ceremony that happens maybe once a year, for actions so extraordinary that they reshape military doctrine. The kind of ceremony that makes headlines in military journals and gets whispered about in Pentagon corridors for decades. But here's the kicker, the detail that makes this whole situation feel like divine justice. Senator Richard Blackwood, the man who just declared me persona non grata in his family, is supposed to be at that ceremony tomorrow. He's been invited as chairman of the Armed Services Committee. He's planning to give a speech about military valor and the sacrifice of American service members. He has no idea he'll be giving that speech about his own stepdaughter. The gate agent approaches the microphone, clipboard in hand, her movements precise and practiced. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I can see the Blackwood family's black Mercedes-AMG still in the parking garage. They're probably still here, somewhere in this sprawling airport complex. Maybe getting overpriced coffee at Starbucks. Maybe browsing in the high-end shops that cater to travelers with more money than sense. Maybe sitting in the first-class lounge, complaining to anyone who'll listen about their difficult stepdaughter who refuses to understand her place in the family. They're completely unaware that their embarrassment is about to be publicly honored as the youngest colonel in Air Force history. Completely oblivious to the fact that the woman they just cast out is considered by military leadership to be one of the most promising officers of her generation. In approximately 90 seconds, everyone in this airport is going to hear Colonel Sarah Elena Martinez called to board a priority military flight. The same Sarah Martinez who was just told she's no longer welcome in the Blackwood family home. The same Sarah Martinez they've spent the last 3 years trying to hide from their political circles, introducing her as Richard's stepdaughter who's going through a military phase, when they're forced to acknowledge her existence at all. The same Sarah Martinez who 18 months ago single-handedly prevented an international incident that could have triggered World War III, but whose actions remain so classified that even senators with top-secret clearance don't know the details. I adjust my dress blues, ensuring every detail is perfect. The Air Force has strict standards for uniform appearance, and mine exceeds every one of them. The fabric is immaculate, pressed to knife-edge creases that could cut glass. My ribbons are arranged in perfect rows, each one representing achievements that my family has never bothered to understand or acknowledge. Combat Action Medal, Air Force Commendation Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters. Meritorious Service Medal, Air Force Achievement Medal with 2 oak leaf clusters. And at the top, the ribbon that makes other officers stop and stare, the Silver Star. Each ribbon tells a story. Each one represents moments when I've put my life on the line for principles that my stepfather claims to support in his Senate speeches but has never actually lived. The difference is that when I talk about sacrifice and service, I'm drawing from memories that wake me up in cold sweats. When he talks about them, he's reading from speechwriter-prepared talking points designed to pull well with military families. The Silver Star ribbon alone represents a night in Syria that I'll never be able to discuss in detail, not even with family, not that they've ever asked. When I came home from that deployment with a promotion and a chest full of medals, my stepfather's only comment was, "Well, I hope you're ready to start thinking about your real career now." My real career. As if protecting American interests in the most dangerous places on Earth, while he protected his approval ratings in climate-controlled committee rooms, wasn't real enough. The boarding area is filling up now. I recognize some of the faces, colonels and generals I've worked with, Defense Department officials whose names appear in classified briefings, intelligence officers whose very presence here suggests this flight carries more significance than a routine transport. They nod at me with professional respect, some with barely concealed admiration. In their world, I'm not the Blackwood family disappointment. I'm Colonel Martinez, the officer who pulled off the impossible in Syria, who turned a potential disaster into a strategic victory so complete that it's still being studied at the War College. But my family will never know those details. They can't know, because revealing the specifics would compromise ongoing operations and endanger lives. So I've had to watch for months as they dismiss my achievements, minimize my rank, and treat my military service like an extended rebellious phase that I'll eventually outgrow once I come to my senses. The gate agent clears her throat and taps the microphone twice, creating that distinctive feedback sound that cuts through airport noise like a knife. The entire boarding area falls silent. Even the civilian travelers nearby seem to sense that something important is about to happen. I think about my mother, my real mother, Maria Elena Martinez, who died when I was 16 and never got to see me become the woman she always believed I could be. She would have been proud today. She would have understood why I chose service over society, why I picked duty over dynasty, why I traded debutante balls for combat zones. She raised me to believe that worth is measured by what you give, not what you take. That honor is earned through action, not inherited through marriage. My stepfather married my mother when I was 12. 4 years after my biological father died in a training accident at Lackland Air Force Base. Staff Sergeant Miguel Martinez, a man I barely remember but whose memory shaped everything I became. Richard Blackwood saw an opportunity to look compassionate and multicultural by marrying a widow with a young daughter. My mother saw a chance to give me stability and opportunities she couldn't provide on a military widow's pension. Neither of them anticipated how that marriage would play out. For the first few years, Richard tried to play the benevolent stepfather. He paid for private schools, bought me clothes, took us on vacation to places I'd only seen in magazines. But he always made it clear that these gifts came with expectations. I was expected to be grateful. I was expected to be moldable. I was expected to become the kind of stepdaughter who would enhance his political image. Accomplished but not threatening, successful but not independent, visible but not problematic. When I started talking about military service at 16, he laughed it off as teenage romanticism. When I applied to the Air Force Academy at 17, he tried to talk me out of it. When I was accepted and chose to attend, he made it clear that he considered it a personal betrayal. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" he demanded during one of our final arguments before I left for Colorado Springs. A senator's daughter choosing military service. It sends the wrong message about my priorities, about our family's values. People will think I'm some kind of warmonger. I'd tried to explain that my choice had nothing to do with his political career, and everything to do with honoring my father's memory and my mother's values. But Richard Blackwood is incapable of understanding motivations that don't center around his own ambitions. The worst part is my half-sister Isabella. Bella, who's 3 years younger than me and everything Richard wanted in a daughter. Beautiful, compliant, interested in the right things. Fashion, society, marrying well. She's engaged to Preston Whitmore III, whose family owns half of Colorado's ski resorts and the other half of its political influence. Their engagement party today was supposed to be the social event of the season, a carefully orchestrated display of wealth and connection that would cement Richard's status in Colorado's political elite. And I ruined it by showing up in uniform. I hadn't planned to make a statement. I'd received orders yesterday morning to report to Denver for immediate transport to Washington, and the engagement party was scheduled for this afternoon. I thought I could make a brief appearance, congratulate Bella, and leave quietly for my flight. I even chose my dress blues specifically because they're formal and appropriate for evening events. But Richard took one look at me and lost his mind. "Absolutely not," he'd hissed, blocking my entry to the ballroom at the Broadmoor Resort. "You are not turning Bella's engagement party into some kind of military recruitment event. This is about her future, not your need for attention." "I'm not trying to make a statement," I'd replied, keeping my voice level despite the humiliation of being dressed down in front of hotel staff and early arriving guests. "I have orders to be in Washington tomorrow morning. This was the only way I could attend Bella's party." "Then you should have chosen the party over your orders," he'd snapped. "Family comes first, Sarah, or at least it should, if you had any sense of proportion." That's when I knew he still didn't understand. After 8 years of marriage to my mother, after 7 years of claiming me as his stepdaughter, after countless Senate speeches about supporting military families, he still fundamentally didn't comprehend that some things are more important than his social calendar. "I can't choose the party over my orders," I'd explained, feeling like I was talking to a child. "That's not how military service works. When you're ordered to report, you report. Lives depend on it." "Whose lives?" he'd demanded. "Who's going to die if you miss one meeting in Washington?" I couldn't answer that question. Not honestly. Because the meeting I'm flying to isn't just any meeting. It's a briefing on Operation Silent Thunder, a classified mission that's been in planning for 8 months and depends on intelligence I gathered during my last deployment. The kind of mission where delays measured in hours can mean the difference between success and international catastrophe. But I couldn't tell him any of that. So I just stood there in my dress blues, looking like exactly what he accused me of being. An attention-seeking daughter who cared more about her military career than her family's happiness. "You know what?" he'd said finally, his voice dropping to the deadly quiet tone that had made him famous in Senate hearings. "I'm done. We're done. Bella deserves better than having her special day overshadowed by your need to play soldier. Get out. Get out of here, get out of our lives, and don't come back until you're ready to be a real member of this family." The words had hit like physical blows. Not because I cared about his approval, I'd given up on that years ago, but because Bella was standing right behind him, tears streaming down her face, and she didn't say a word in my defense. My half-sister, who I'd taught to ride bikes and helped with homework, and protected from school bullies, just stood there in her designer dress and said nothing, while her father threw me out of the family. So I'd walked back to my rental car, driven to their house to collect my things, and endured another screaming match while I packed. Richard had followed me from room to room, cataloging every way I'd disappointed him, every missed family dinner due to deployments, every social event I'd skipped for military obligations, every choice I'd made that prioritized duty over his definition of family loyalty. "You're selfish," he'd concluded as I zipped up my duffel bag. "You're selfish, and you're ungrateful, and you're so obsessed with playing war hero that you can't see how you're hurting the people who actually care about you." I'd wanted to laugh at that. Hurting the people who care about me? The people who've made it clear for years that their care is conditional on my conformity? The people who've never once asked about my work except to complain when it interferes with their plans? But I'd kept my mouth shut and finished packing. Because some truths are too devastating to speak aloud, and the truth is that Richard Blackwood doesn't care about me. He cares about the version of me that exists in his imagination. Compliant, grateful, politically useful. The real me, the me that's dedicated her life to protecting American interests in the most dangerous places on Earth, is an inconvenience he's been trying to manage for years. Well, he doesn't have to manage me anymore. The gate agent raises the microphone to her lips, and the entire boarding area holds its breath. Major General Kane straightens her jacket and moves closer to the boarding gate. Brigadier General Torres closes his briefing folder and stands at attention. A dozen other senior officers form a loose semicircle around the gate area, their collective presence turning a routine boarding process into something approaching a military honor ceremony. In 30 seconds, everyone in this airport is going to hear my name announced. Not as Richard Blackwood's problematic stepdaughter, but as Colonel Sarah Elena Martinez, recipient of the Silver Star, veteran of 3 combat deployments, and the youngest officer in Air Force history to be promoted to full colonel. In 30 seconds, my family is going to learn who I really am, not the disappointment they've been trying to hide, but the war hero they never bothered to see. The microphone crackles with static, and I can hear my heartbeat in my ears. This is it. This is the moment when everything changes, when the balance of power shifts forever. When the family that tried to erase me discovers they've been living with greatness and calling it inadequacy. The gate agent looks directly at me, her expression respectful and professional. She knows exactly who she's about to call. She knows exactly what this moment means. And in the parking garage, my family has no idea that their world is about to be turned upside down by the voice of a Delta Airlines employee with a standard issue microphone and a clipboard full of names that will change everything they thought they knew about success, service, and what it means to make your family proud. The gate agent clears her throat and speaks into the microphone with the crisp professionalism that comes from years of making announcements that change people's lives. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now ready to begin priority boarding for Military Charter Flight 447 to Joint Base Andrews. We'd like to invite our distinguished military passengers to board at this time. The words echo through Terminal C with perfect clarity, carrying across the departure gates, the shops, the restaurants, and yes, the parking garage where my family is probably buying overpriced coffee and congratulating themselves on handling the Sarah situation so diplomatically. Major General Kane steps forward first, her silver hair catching the airport lighting as she moves with the measured precision of someone who's commanded thousands of troops and advised presidents. Behind her, Brigadier General Torres follows, his chest heavy with ribbons that tell stories of 3 decades in service. One by one, the senior officers form a line at the gate, their collective presence transforming what should be a routine boarding process into something approaching a state ceremony. And then the gate agent speaks the words that will change everything. We'd especially like to recognize Colonel Sarah Elena Martinez, recipient of the Silver Star and the youngest officer in Air Force history to achieve the rank of full colonel. Colonel Martinez, please approach for priority boarding. The announcement hits the terminal like a sonic boom. Conversations stop mid-sentence. Travelers look up from their phones. Even the TSA agents at the security checkpoint pause in their duties to locate the source of such unusual recognition. I stand up slowly, shouldering my duffel bag with the same deliberate precision I've used in briefing rooms and combat zones. Every eye in the terminal is on me now. Some curious, some respectful, some simply awed by the realization that they're witnessing something extraordinary. As I walk toward the gate, Major General Kane steps aside and salutes. Not the perfunctory gesture that junior officers give their superiors, but the slow, deliberate salute that one warrior gives to another in recognition of extraordinary achievement. Brigadier General Torres follows suit. Then the colonel behind him. Then every officer in the boarding area. I'm walking through a corridor of saluting senior officers, each one acknowledging not just my rank but my achievements. The Silver Star isn't handed out for paperwork or routine operations. It's reserved for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, for courage under fire that goes above and beyond the call of duty. In the entire Air Force, fewer than 500 people have received this decoration since World War II. And I'm 25 years old. The gate agent's voice continues to boom through the terminal. Colonel Martinez will be joining Secretary of Defense Morrison tomorrow morning for a classified briefing regarding her exceptional service in Operation Silent Thunder. The colonel's intelligence work in Afghanistan prevented multiple terrorist attacks and saved hundreds of American lives. Operation Silent Thunder. Even the name is classified, but the gate agent has been authorized to use it because tomorrow's ceremony isn't just about recognizing past achievements. It's about preparing for the next phase of my career. When the Secretary of Defense personally requests your presence, it's not just for a medal ceremony. It's because they have new missions, new responsibilities, New ways for you to serve your country at the highest levels. I hand my boarding pass to the gate agent, who looks at me with something approaching reverence. Thank you for your service, Colonel Martinez, she says quietly. And congratulations on your recognition. Thank you, I reply, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. As I step onto the aircraft, I catch a glimpse through the terminal windows of the parking garage where my family is undoubtedly processing what they just heard. Every word of that announcement was audible throughout the airport. Every PA speaker, every gate area, every restaurant and shop just heard my name connected to achievements that dwarf anything anyone in my family has ever accomplished. The aircraft itself tells a story that would make Richard's political connections look like amateur hour. This isn't a commercial flight or even a standard military transport. This is a modified C-37A, the military version of a Gulfstream 5, typically reserved for cabinet-level officials and senior military leadership. The fact that I'm traveling on this aircraft sends a clear message about my importance to national security operations. Inside, the cabin is configured for high-level briefings and secure communications. Major General Kane gestures for me to take a seat near the front, in an area typically reserved for the most senior passengers. The irony isn't lost on me. 12 hours ago, my stepfather was questioning whether I deserved a seat at his dinner table. Now I'm taking a seat among the most senior military leadership in the country. Colonel Martinez, Major General Kane, says as the aircraft prepares for departure, I want you to know that your work in Afghanistan was briefed all the way to the Joint Chiefs. What you accomplished out there, it's the kind of intelligence coup that comes along maybe once in a decade. Brigadier General Torres nods in agreement. The terrorist financing network you unraveled. We've been trying to map those connections for 5 years. You did it in 8 months, and the intel you provided has already led to the disruption of operations in 7 countries. I think about my family, probably sitting in some overpriced airport cafe right now, trying to process what they just heard. They thought they knew who I was. They thought they understood the scope of my achievements. They had no idea that their desk officer stepdaughter had been conducting the kind of intelligence operations that reshape international security policy. As the aircraft taxis toward the runway, my secure phone buzzes with a text message. It's from my commanding officer, Colonel Morrison. Heard your family finally learned who you really are. How does it feel? I think about that question as Denver falls away beneath us. How does it feel to have your family discover that everything they believed about you was wrong? How does it feel to know that the people who claim to love you never bothered to understand your actual worth? It feels like justice. But more than that, it feels like freedom. For years, I've been trying to earn their approval while simultaneously pursuing a career that they fundamentally couldn't comprehend. I've been living in 2 worlds. The world where I'm Colonel Martinez, respected military officer and intelligence expert, and the world where I'm Sarah, the disappointing stepdaughter who chose the wrong path. Now those worlds have collided, and there's no going back. My phone rings. It's Bella. I consider not answering. Part of me wants to let them stew in their shock and embarrassment for a while longer. But she's still my sister, and despite everything that happened tonight, I still love her. Hello, Bella. Sarah? Her voice is shaky, barely above a whisper. Sarah, we just heard, everyone heard, the announcement at the airport. Is it true? Did you really save hundreds of lives? The details are classified, I reply, which is both true and diplomatic. The youngest colonel in Air Force history, she continues. Sarah, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't we know any of this? I could be cruel here. I could point out that they never asked, never showed interest, never considered that my military service might involve anything more significant than the bureaucratic busywork they assumed it was. I could remind her that just 2 hours ago she stood by while her father threw me out of the family for wearing the uniform that represents achievements beyond their comprehension. Instead, I choose honesty. Because you never wanted to know, Bella. Every time I tried to talk about my work, you changed the subject. Every time I mentioned deployments or operations or the reasons I couldn't come home for holidays, you treated it like an inconvenience rather than a career that matters. But we didn't know it was. We thought you were just, Sarah, if you had known what? That my work actually mattered? That my achievements were real? That the military career you all dismissed as a, quote, phase was actually more important than anything any of you have ever done. The silence on the other end tells me everything I need to know. They're not upset that they misjudged me. They're upset that they misjudged my importance. They're not apologizing for years of dismissive treatment. They're apologizing for missing an opportunity to be associated with someone significant. "Where are you?" she asks finally. "I'm on a military aircraft en route to Washington for a classified briefing with the Secretary of Defense." "Sarah, Dad wants to talk to you. He's really upset. He had no idea about any of this. About what you've accomplished, about how important your work is. Of course he's upset." Senator Richard Blackwood, chairman of the Armed Services Committee, just learned that his stepdaughter has been conducting the kind of intelligence operations that he can only read about in classified briefings. The woman he dismissed as a, quote, desk officer has been doing work that directly impacts the legislation he writes and the policies he promotes. More than that, he's probably realizing that his treatment of me reflects poorly on his judgment. How can a man who claims to support military families justify throwing his own military family member out of the house? How can someone who writes defense policy explain that he didn't know his own stepdaughter was involved in classified operations at the highest levels? "Put him on," I say. There's a shuffling sound, and then Richard's voice comes through the phone. He sounds older than he did 2 hours ago, his usual political confidence replaced by something approaching humility. "Sarah, I owe you an apology, a serious apology. I had no idea about what you've been doing, about how significant your work is." "You never asked," I reply simply. I know I never asked. I made assumptions. I thought your military service was temporary. I thought it was something you'd outgrow." "Outgrow," I repeat, "like a hobby." I was wrong. I was completely wrong about everything. About your career, about your achievements, about what your service means. "Sarah, I just heard that you're receiving the Silver Star. Do you have any idea how extraordinary that is? Do you know how few people ever receive that recognition?" I want to laugh. Of course I know how extraordinary it is. I'm the one who earned it. I'm the one who risked everything to gather the intelligence that prevented terrorist attacks across 3 continents. I'm the one who spent months in hostile territory, using skills and courage that he couldn't imagine in his safest political fantasies. "I'm aware," I say dryly. "Sarah, I sit on the Armed Services Committee. I read classified briefings about military operations around the world. The fact that you've been involved in work at that level, the fact that I didn't know, it makes me look like a fool." And there it is. He's not apologizing because he hurt me. He's apologizing because his ignorance reflects poorly on his professional competence. He's not upset that he dismissed my achievements. He's upset that those achievements are significant enough to make his dismissal look foolish. Yes, I agree. It does make you look like a fool. The bluntness seems to shock him into silence. In all our years of conflict, I've never been this direct, this willing to call out his failures without softening the blow. "Sarah, please, can we start over? Can we find a way to fix this?" "Fix what, Richard? Fix the fact that you spent years treating me like an embarrassment? Fix the fact that you threw me out of your house for wearing the uniform that represents more service to this country than you'll achieve in your entire political career? Fix the fact that you were more concerned about your image tonight than your stepdaughter's feelings?" "I want to make it right," he says quietly. "How?" "I don't know yet, but I want to try. We want to try. Your mother." Nancy is devastated. She says things that can't be taken back. Bella is crying. Everyone feels terrible about what happened tonight. Everyone feels terrible now that they know I'm important. Everyone wants to make amends, now that my achievements reflect well on the family instead of poorly. Nobody felt terrible when they thought I was just a career military officer, with no particular distinction. Nobody wanted to make things right when they believed my service was ordinary rather than extraordinary. "I'll be at the Pentagon tomorrow morning," I tell him. "After that, I'll be receiving new orders. I don't know where I'll be stationed next, but I doubt it will be anywhere near Colorado. Sarah, please don't let tonight affect your relationship with this family. We love you. We've always loved you." "No," I say firmly. "You love the idea of me. You love the version of me that makes you look good. You loved me when you thought you could shape me into what you wanted, and you love me again now that you know I'm important. But you've never loved me for who I actually am. That's not true. It is true. And you know what? That's okay. Because I don't need your love anymore. I don't need your approval or your acceptance or your validation. I have something better. What's that? I have the respect of people who understand what service means. I have the trust of leaders who depend on me to protect American lives. I have the knowledge that my work matters more than your political career ever will. The aircraft is climbing steadily now, leaving Colorado and my family's small world behind. Through the window, I can see the lights of Denver fading into the distance. Soon we'll be flying over Kansas, then Missouri, then the heartland of America that I've spent my career protecting. Sarah, Richard says, his voice breaking slightly, what can I do? How can I make this right? You can't, I tell him honestly. You can't undo years of dismissive treatment with one conversation. You can't apologize your way out of the fact that you valued your political image more than your family relationships. You can't take back the fact that you threw me out of your house tonight for wearing a uniform that represents more honor than you'll ever achieve. Quote, so that's it? You're done with us? I consider the question seriously. Am I done with them? Part of me wants to say yes, to cut ties completely and build a life that doesn't include people who've proven they can't see my worth. But another part of me remembers Bella teaching me to braid friendship bracelets, remembers Nancy trying to help me pick out a dress for senior prom, remembers Richard walking me down the aisle at my military academy graduation because my biological father wasn't there to do it. I'm done trying to earn your approval, I say finally. I'm done changing myself to fit your expectations. I'm done pretending that your opinion of me matters more than my own knowledge of my worth. But if you want to build a real relationship, one based on who I actually am rather than who you wish I was, then maybe we can try. After you've had time to process what you learned tonight. After you've figured out whether you can accept that I'll always choose duty over your social calendar. After you've decided whether you can be proud of a daughter who serves her country instead of embarrassed by one who doesn't fit your political image. I am proud of you, he says quickly. Sarah, I'm incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. You're proud now that you know other people think I'm important. That's not the same thing as being proud of me for my own sake. Major General Kane approaches my seat, pointing to her watch and mouthing 5 minutes to indicate we're approaching some kind of important timing for classified communications. I have to go, I tell Richard. Military business. Sarah, wait, the ceremony tomorrow, at the Pentagon. I'd like to be there. I'd like to witness you receiving the recognition you deserve. The request surprises me. You're already invited, I tell him. As chairman of the Armed Services Committee, you're expected to attend. I just didn't think you'd want to be associated with your embarrassing stepdaughter in such a public forum. Sarah. I'll see you there, Richard. Try not to look too shocked when they call my name. I hang up the phone and turn to Major General Kane, who's waiting patiently with a classified briefing folder. Family? She asks, with the knowing smile of someone who's navigated similar dynamics. Something like that. They always seem surprised, she observes. Families? They think they know what military service looks like, and then they discover that their son or daughter has been doing work that shapes international policy. It's particularly difficult for political families, I've found. They're used to thinking of themselves as the important ones. Senator Blackwood is chairman of the Armed Services Committee, I explain. He writes policy about operations like the one I just completed, but he never connected that to my actual work. Ah, she nods. That explains the shock. He's probably realizing that his stepdaughter has been implementing the policies he only theorizes about. She hands me the briefing folder. Speaking of which, we need to discuss tomorrow's ceremony and what comes after. Your new assignment isn't just a reward for past performance. It's preparation for future responsibilities. I open the folder and scan the first page. What I see makes my breath catch. This isn't just about receiving a medal. This is about joining a program that develops the military's future senior leadership. This is about training for responsibilities that could someday include advising presidents and shaping national security policy. The Strategic Leadership Development Program, Major General Kane explains. It's invitation only, limited to officers who've demonstrated exceptional capability in high-stakes situations. You'd be the youngest officer ever selected. The youngest officer ever selected. Again. I think about my family, probably still sitting in that airport cafe, trying to process everything they've learned tonight. They thought they understood the scope of my achievements. They have no idea that tonight was just the beginning. What does the program involve? I ask. 2 years of advanced training in strategic planning, international relations, and defense policy. Rotations through the Pentagon, the State Department, and the National Security Council. Direct access to senior leadership and classified operations at the highest levels. It's designed to prepare officers for positions where they'll be advising cabinet-level officials and influencing national security decisions. Positions where I'll be advising cabinet-level officials, like the Secretary of Defense who's meeting with me tomorrow, like the National Security Advisor, who's apparently requested my input on Middle Eastern policy, like the President herself, who might someday depend on my analysis to make decisions that affect millions of lives. And after the program? That depends on your performance and the needs of the service. But, typically, graduates go on to senior staff positions, command assignments, or roles in intelligence leadership. The sky's the limit for someone with your record. I close the briefing folder and lean back in my seat, trying to process the magnitude of what's being offered. 2 hours ago, my stepfather was throwing me out of his house for embarrassing him. Now I'm being invited to join a program that could eventually position me to influence the kind of policies he writes in his committee work. The irony is so complete it feels almost scripted. My phone buzzes with a text from Bella. I'm sorry, Sarah, for all of it. For not defending you tonight. For not understanding what your service means. For treating your career like it was less important than ours. I know sorry isn't enough, but I want you to know that I'm proud to be your sister. I stare at the message for a long time. It's the first time she's ever acknowledged that my career might be important. It's the first time she's apologized for anything related to my military service. It's the first time she's said she's proud to be my sister without qualifying it with conditions or expectations. I type back, thank you. That means more than you know. Another text. Will you call me after your ceremony tomorrow? I want to hear about it. I want to understand what you do, what your work means. I want to be a better sister. I'll call you, I reply. As the aircraft flies through the night toward Washington, I find myself thinking about forgiveness and family, and the difference between loving someone and understanding them. My family failed me tonight, but they also learned something crucial about who I am and what I've accomplished. Whether that knowledge changes our relationship permanently remains to be seen. But for the first time in years, I feel like I can build a relationship with them based on truth, rather than their expectations. For the first time, they know exactly who Sarah Martinez is, and what she's capable of. For the first time, their pride in me is based on my actual achievements, rather than their hope that I'll eventually become someone else. Tomorrow morning, I'll stand in the Pentagon as the youngest colonel in Air Force history receives the Silver Star for extraordinary service to her country. My family will be in the audience, finally understanding that the woman they tried to diminish has been living a life of service and achievement that surpasses anything they've ever accomplished. And after the ceremony, I'll begin the next phase of a career that could someday position me to influence the policies that shape America's place in the world. The family that kicked me out of their house will have to live with the knowledge that they rejected greatness and called it inadequacy. But more importantly, I'll continue building a life of purpose and service that doesn't depend on their approval. Some victories are measured in medals and promotions. Others are measured in the freedom to be yourself without apology. Tonight I achieved both. As the lights of Colorado disappear behind us, and the lights of Washington appear ahead, I close my eyes and smile. Tomorrow, the world will see Colonel Sarah Elena Martinez receive the recognition she's earned. But tonight, for the first time in years, she's free to be exactly who she is without seeking anyone's permission. And that freedom, that authentic self-acceptance is worth more than any medal they could ever give her. The microphone that announced my name at the airport wasn't just calling me to board a flight. It was announcing my liberation from the need to be anyone other than the woman I chose to become. The woman my family is finally ready to meet. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.